Reform One talked about some major areas of reform. Now, as the campaign pace accelerates, let's look again at some federal policy areas where Republicans are fighting for reform. Drug use in America is holding the nation hostage. Every day we pick up the newspaper to read that more and more of our children are injecting themselves with dangerous and fatal doses of highly addictive drugs. In Washington, the president has made getting drugs out of America one of his #1 priorities, a sustained and relentless effort to rid America of this scourge by mobilizing every segment of our society against drug abuse. Most notably, Americans have become increasingly fearful of the widespread use of crack. One congressman in particular has taken a keen interest in preventing further widespread use of this fatal substance. Congressman Joe DioGuardi of New York has this to say about his efforts.
As a new member and one that's on the Select Committee of Narcotics and Drug Abuse, I am particularly sensitive to this issue. My district is just north of New York City, Westchester County. New York City right now is the worldwide capital of crack. Crack, as you know, is the new highly addictive, highly potent form of cocaine. Kids who are experimenting with crack just 2 or 3 times now become addicted to it. We need to do something almost immediately to get this substance off the streets. I have a bill. I am the House sponsor of a bill introduced by Senator D'Amato called the Crack and Cocaine Meaningful Penalties Act. Would you believe right now the laws that we're dealing with, we still deal with heroin? So that for the minimal penalties to apply, as they do with heroin, you have to be caught with 15,000 vials of crack. This bill would bring it down to 15 vials. We have a lot to do, and we've got to do it right away because kids are being addicted almost every day, every minute, let's put it that way, on the streets. And it's about time we got to it. As a local initiative in my district, I've announced a neighborhood crack watch, an extension of a neighborhood crime watch. We've got to get every element of the community involved in this, starting with elected officials, police commissioners, presidents of the school boards, superintendents of schools, presidents of the PTAs, and the student bodies. There is no way to win this war on drugs just by dealing with it here in Washington, but it's very important to deal with it here too. There can't be any weak links in this chain. A chain with a weak link is useless. So we've got to be sure we attack this thing at every level, and we've got to start here in Washington. Thank you, Doug.
Unfortunately, this is easier said than done. The Democratic leadership has control of the legislative agenda. Republican Whip Trent Lott points out,
the heat you're feeling this morning is what we're going to put on this drug legislation, and the inactivity by the Judiciary Committee, the Rules Committee, and the leadership in the House of Representatives. I'm here this morning because I'm concerned about this issue. The problem of drugs is not being properly addressed by the Congress and by the federal government, and it is partially because I think we're not getting leadership on this issue in the House of Representatives. As a member of the Rules Committee and as a member of the Republican leadership, I'm here this morning to say that we're not going to stand still while the Judiciary Committee just holds this important legislation and there's inaction by the Democratic leadership. We're going to put pressure on them. If we do not get action by the Judiciary Committee, we're going to find ways to bring action on the floor of the House of Representatives through amendments through the rest of this year. This issue is too important for all of America, and particularly for our children today.
Children, that's what's at stake. The war against drugs is a war to preserve the safety and well-being of our children. Congressman Tom Coleman of Missouri.
We propose some creative and new ideas, I think, on this issue, and the first one is to create a national commission on drug-free schools. The reason for creating a commission would be to elevate this issue to the level that it should have and the prestige and the focus that needs to be done. And we think that taking it out of the usual bureaucratic channels will help identify that and help the programs. It would be a 5-member commission appointed by the President, and one of those members would be the Secretary of Education. We think that by cutting through red tape, we're really going to get something done on providing grant and seed monies and matching funds to the states and localities of the nation. Now, to accompany the National Commission will be a National Advisory Board made up of 15 to 25 outstanding individuals, and this is where your celebrity, your entertainer, your professional or amateur athlete can play a role model and a very high-profile position to relate to our youngsters and to get their attention and, very frankly, to help generate and support and focus attention on this issue. But we're asking more than the usual, will you put your name on a letterhead? We're asking these people to help on a national educational effort via the media and any other way that they can, but also to lend their support to raising private funds to battle the drug problem. Jerry referred to an analogous situation where Americans were willing to contribute, I think, $250 million to restore Lady Liberty. And that was an outpouring of support from school children themselves to corporate America. And so we propose to create a national trust on drug-free schools, which would embody and incorporate that type of private sector initiative to supplement the public funds that we are willing to spend on this problem, but more importantly, probably to outweigh those numbers with private contributions. I think certainly if Americans are willing to contribute their money to preserve our past, that they're just as willing and probably more willing to contribute funds to preserve our children's future.
Finally, Americans want and Republicans support tough mandatory prison sentences for the drug pushers. Republican lawmakers are sending out a warning to the drug dealers and users that time is running out. Bill McCullum, what's being done in the Judiciary Committee to wage war against drugs?
We have put together in our Judiciary Committee a very tough package of criminal laws, new minimum mandatory sentences that I think all of us agree upon, although the Republicans want the opportunity when we go to the floor to vote on a death penalty for those who have been involved in continuous criminal activity with the controlled substance area. And Clay Shaw and George Gekas, who are here, have been very instrumental in promoting that area, and we want the opportunity to vote on it. In that bill also, that we put out yesterday are things that involve users or possessors, at least on federal property. Minimum mandatory sentences with regard and with respect to those as well. If it's federal property, for example, we would promote and we support the idea that if you are a possessor of a controlled substance, there should be a minimum fine of $1,000 the first time, a minimum sentence of 15 days in jail for a second conviction, a minimum sentence of 90 days in jail for a third conviction, and so on, in addition to the minimum mandatory major sentences for major traffickers. The Judiciary Committee also yesterday passed out a spending package, an authorization bill. In that authorization bill is money that we support for the Drug Enforcement Administration, just as Republicans support money for the needed improvements in Customs and in Coast Guard and the rest of our law enforcement that comes under the supervision and under the auspices of other committees besides Judiciary. And in that bill also were substantial sums for new prisons. If we're going to have minimum mandatory sentences and get tough, as Jerry Lewis said, we've got to have those kinds of things.